It's a different way of communicating and different channels where you can reach out to policymakers or to other think tanks and NGOs as well. We work quite a lot in coalition. We feel that it's also important to translate our technical messages to other organizations. That's really also how you can multiply your impact through
Absolutely.
the others and with the others.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of In Evidence. My guest today is Marlene Simeon. She's the Director of Policy of Future Cleantech Architects. And with her today, we're going to discuss how financing of their think tank has impacted the DNA, the structure, and communication of everything that they do. From there, we're going to expand into effective communication, tactics, and how think tanks can really be at the center of the political discourse these days. Marlene, I'm very happy to have you here.
Yes, thank you very much, Federico. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess this episode is going to be a great one because it's really going to be very strategic. And with you, we're going to discuss about how, say, the specific strategic choices you guys have made in terms of funding have impacted everything that you do with Future Cleantech Architects. But for the ones that don't know you yet, would you like to give us a bit of introduction of who you are and what your organization does?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much. Well, FCA, so Future Cleantech Architects, was actually created 5-6 years ago. So we are still a young organization, but very active. And especially we have our headquarters in Remscheid in Germany, but we are also across Europe. So in Amsterdam, in Cambridge, in Brussels, so in many parts of Europe. And our outreach is really global and European as well. So we are a climate innovation think tank. We focus on kind of neglected sectors where we see there is an innovation gap and where we can bring our analytical, technical, and policy expertise. And we focus in many areas, so be it in heavy industry, so steel, cement, so those hard to abate sectors. But we also look into transport, aviation, and shipping, as well as on energy systems like the grid, energy storage, and in particular, long duration energy storage. So always looking at kind of niche sectors where there are not so many solutions and policy attention for the moment, but where we see a great potential for emission abatement.
Yeah, so really what makes it special is to look at the, I would say, almost opportunities where you think that there is less attention for, but probably financing these opportunities would lead to actually the greatest effect in terms of results for the climate.
Yes.
So you guys were born around 4 or 5 years ago. How did it all start?
Yes, it all started with our founder and CEO is Peter Schneering. So he's from Germany. He has worked in the IEA, so the International Energy Agency, as well as in different consultancy. And he saw these gaps in terms of engineering, technical, clean tech, innovation, and the policy side. And he decided, okay, with the support of UNIDO, for instance, very early in the process as well, or with other partners, he decided to fund this organization. And we are non-profit, we are science-based, and we are independent. That's really the core of our DNA, who we are actually. It's really these three pillars.
Yeah, cool. So I would like to zoom in into one of the things that you touched already. So as you said, what was from the beginning the strategic choice of deciding to finance this research, the scientific research that is behind all of your action and the impact you are trying to create? As you said, not from grants, or at least not from grants alone, but also with the input of the private sector. How did it come up? What was the path to finding funds? And also, I'm curious to know, what were the opportunities back then when you were exploring for opportunities?
Yes, we indeed we are not well. As FCA, we are involved in some research project, but not EU actually, but more like some German research projects. So with the German Aerospace Center, for instance, DLR, we are involved in some very specific project, but otherwise we are financed through aggregators, so donors, small donors. That's really the idea where those philanthropy or foundations are funding organizations that can move the needle, that can have a real long-term impact. And every action is also screened with this impact for Euro perspective and lens. So that's really our purpose, to have every time that we decide to engage in an action, it's because we know that we can have an impact and that other organizations are not already very active on it or very knowledgeable about it, but where we see there is a gap, and then we can go and decide to have an action in this area. So that's really very targeted, curated, and specific.
Cool. And so a big part of your funding actually comes from the whole philosophy of effective altruism, which I think it's extremely appealing, probably especially to newer generation, which are more like into really wanted to see an effect for what they do. But for the ones who don't know what it is, would you like to explain what effective altruism is?
Yeah, I would say it's both a donation platform and an aggregator, where they want to optimize the impact per euro and have long-term systemic change. So it's not like a funding specific outputs or reports, but really having this long-term impact on society and the planet in the end, because as FCA, we are addressing climate change. So that's really the purpose of those aggregators. And we are also evaluated by philanthropy evaluators like Giving Green. We are ranked in the top non-profits addressing climate change by Giving Green. We are in the top 10 globally. So that's also very interesting for donors and small donors like you, like me, and other people. If they want to donate, they know that they will have some impact through those aggregators and evaluators as well.
Yeah, because like one of the things I can imagine, like the question that someone who's not knowledgeable about the whole sector would have, right? Like, how is this level of scrutiny different from, let's say, for example, what other registered NGOs do, or, you know, like other companies that have to be accountable? Like, what's really making the difference here? What makes the whole philosophy different from the way in which do good has been done so far?
Yeah, it's a do good, but it's also effectiveness.
Mm-hmm.
So there is really a mission-driven orientation, I would say. It's really effectiveness minded, those organizations, and they like to back organizations that they know they will move the needle in terms of policy, for instance. So if you are able to change an EU policy or to influence a part of it or some initiatives from the European institutions, you know that it can have an impact across Europe, but also beyond the borders. And that's also what is interesting with this type of financing. Now, really looking at how to be the most effective with the money that is given actually to such type of organization.
I find it very interesting. I also think that's a personal opinion of that. I also think that the, say, neutrality of this approach, which doesn't start from the goal, but actually starts from the methodology, it seems to fit very well, actually, the whole mission of FCA, which is looking at, say, underrepresented opportunities. Again, not starting from the end goal, but rather from the methodology of looking at what's more effective. So that's actually very interesting. It seems like you found a way of financing your research, which was actually very, very similar in terms of value to what you guys stand for. What I'm curious to know now is like this specific approach that you've had to how your research and your activity has been founded. Would you say it has shaped your DNA? And if yes, to what extent?
Yeah, probably, or at least it supports our DNA, which is to be independent in our analysis. And that's really I think this type of funding allows us to to move quickly. So that's the thing. We can be very reactive when we see that there is a policy window which is open. We can go directly because we have this flexibility. We are not funded because of one output, but really this long-term systemic change. So that changes also the way we can work and react to external factors. Also, it
Can you
helps
maybe
us
explain better this concept to me? How does that translate into agility?
into agility, because you are not bound in terms of, okay, by the end of July, you need to give a report on this specific action. But you are aware of what's happening in the European institutions, for instance. You hear something, you see that there will be a development there or there, and then you can decide internally, because you have this flexible funding, you can decide where you will have the most impact and where you see that it's a neglected sector.
Okay.
And then you can decide, okay, altogether we change or we allocate some resources to this specific.
Interesting. And what are kind of like the check moments that you have when you decide to have this specific kind of funding?
Maybe what do you mean by check moments?
So what I mean by that, you said that, say, in the traditional way, you have to, for example, release a certain report by a specific day, right? I can imagine that if you get, say, in your structure, in your way of getting funding, there are still some checks,
Absolutely.
some accountability moments. I'm curious to know, when are they? Are they, for example, just at the beginning, or are they at some other point in time?
So at the beginning, of course, we have to present our kind of theory of change and where we see that we can have the most impact, but also along the way. So regularly, it's very important also to keep donors and small donors now informed of what's going on in Brussels, for instance, or in other parts of the organizations, because they can follow our work, they can adjust as well their donation if they want. And it's very important as well to be sure to be aligned or to communicate properly the impacts that we are having at FCA. Yes.
Okay. And is it like a formal point in time when you have to be accountable?
Yeah, I would say like at least once a year, of course,
Okay.
but then it's really on a regular basis, because we contribute also to their newsletter, we contribute to their internal reporting. So I would say, I think, my colleague is the Director of Technologies and Impact, Magnolia Tovar, is doing an amazing job, where I think every month or every week or every time that we have a new opportunity, she's communicating to the donors and to the aggregators. It's very important in terms of accountability, transparency, also to keep the contact and regular contact with our funders. Yes.
You said that the director of technology actually is very involved into how the results are communicated to the stakeholders. Is it because you are developing, for example, interactive tools, portals, widgets? Why is the director of technology involved in that?
She has a great experience in this area of fundraising as well, and in communicating with donors and aggregators. So she has an extensive experience in this area. But it's also very important for us, even if at the end we want to have a kind of policy impact, no policy change, which will have a greater impact in Europe and beyond. But also it's all backed by analytical technology analysis. If we don't have the evidence, we don't have a position, for instance. So it's really interconnected, technology, policy, and analysis.
Can you maybe give me some concrete examples in which you are communicating this data? What I'm curious to know is, like, do you communicate them more in the traditional way, like of a report, or are you also looking at more like interactive ways of communicating?
Yeah, we are currently developing more and more tools, so more interactive as well. But it's I would say it's through reports, through emails as well. It really depends, but I think newsletter, LinkedIn post, so different types of channels are very useful, because you don't have the same audience now according to the channel. So it's very important also to have a variety. We can see that with donors as well. videos, make it more concrete, for instance. So we are trying to diversify and to develop our way of communicating our results and impact.
Yeah, I understand. It makes sense to have different ways of communicating. Actually, I think we already started talking about the other topic that I wanted to ask you. So how the transparency that you need to have, which is due to the way the FCA is funded, kind of informs all the way in which the organization communicates. So in terms of communication and transparency, how has the specific way you get funded, say, shaped the communication DNA of the company? And what do you do to enhance transparency?
Already being registered in some transparency registers at EU level or German level, for instance, this kind of things. Regularly communicating results with donors, with foundation, having a website regularly updated as well. But what we really want us as well is to be very curated and very, how to say that, like really simple in the way we communicate as well. If you've been on our website, for instance, but we started with what we call the fact sheets. That was like 5 years ago. We started with some fact sheets where we wanted to summarize in a technical, but at the same time, simple way, how you can decarbonize a sector. So simplicity is really something that is powerful as well for transparency reason, and be sure that external people can understand what you mean and what you want in this area. So that's really the thing we wanted to drive.
That's interesting, this example of fact sheet, because it's related to what you see a lot nowadays, that simply having knowledge, it's not enough. And a lot of organizations also need to bridge the gap between knowledge and impact that they make. And that is often made of a communication that is more bite-sized and more actually adapt to where, as users, we consume it, right? Which is not just the report for legislators. When it comes to that, like, obviously, I guess legislators are your main audience. Do you consider other audiences in your action?
Well, I would say in terms of so policymakers, indeed, at European level specifically, but also sometimes to time at national level. We also have our audiences, of course, the donors as well. Not that we want the same type of action, but it's about communicating. And we also have like the general public can be an audience, but sometimes not really, actually. Our purpose is really to make a policy change.
Yeah.
So we need also policymakers, be it at global level, European level, or national level.
But do you ever consider the general public? Sorry for interrupting you. Do you ever consider the general public with specific initiatives or campaigns or not? Is it more like a byproduct?
Yes, for the moment, not really, actually. But we think if, I don't know, a general audience or public can understand what we do, I think the policymakers also can understand. Okay. So that's also a check. Yeah. A way to be sure that what you try to communicate is understandable as well by people. It's very important at the end. What we really want to be is really to have a sharp framing, short documents that everyone can embrace and also really use for their own work, and especially policymakers.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually quite a debated topic, right? If increasing the simplicity of your message kind of downgrades it. I don't know if you've had internally the same debate yourself, but I'm curious to have your point of view there. Like, do you think that simplifying messages also has the risk of oversimplifying them and that to decrease the quality? Or can you find a good balance between simplification and still high quality of what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us, like my colleagues are all engineers and are all very experts in their areas. They have PhDs and have studied in different European universities and abroad. And I think the way they translate actually their knowledge into more what I call simple, but it's not simple at all. Probably an external person would say that it's still very complicated, but we try to explain the languages, the flows, the relations between different topics. If you take, I don't know, thermal energy storage, so already you can be lost with already this term, but it's how to explain like how heat, for instance, is a major challenge for industry in Europe. So you start with a heat challenge, and then you explain what are the solutions. So electrification until a certain temperature, for instance, you can use heat pump or e-boilers even, and other solutions. But then when you go to higher temperature, maybe for the business case, you need other solution and thermal energy storage. So you try really to have this chain of thinking and to be able to have the pros and cons of every solution and to explain why this can be sustainable and this can be embedded into a broader decarbonization framework. So it's really this final approach that is really important, from the big picture to the bird's side perspective to the very technical and cost-effective solution.
Got it. So you have like a funnel approach. Is it also like layered into different channels? Like, for example, I don't know, it starts from a social media post, and then if you're interested, you can read the newsletter, or does this funnel live within the same platform?
I would say, again, it's different audience, different channels. And we can see now since the end of, or not really the end, but the move from Twitter or X to LinkedIn as well, or to other social media. Now you have to adjust a little bit the way you are communicating. It's really different from 10 years ago when I worked, or 15 years ago when I started in Brussels. So it's a different way of communicating and different channels where you can reach out to policymakers or to other think tanks and NGOs as well. We work quite a lot in coalition. We feel that it's also important to translate our technical messages and to other organizations. That's really also how you can multiply your impact through
Absolutely.
the others and with the others.
Do you have any concrete example that you would like to share about a way of communicating a policy change, for example, a proposed policy change that you have found very effective, that worked out very well in practice?
Yeah, maybe what was interesting. So one example is the recent or the pilot of the European Commission on heat electrification. We know that heat solutions were not that supported at European level. It was a lot about CCS, for instance, so carbon capture and storage, or about other solutions like hydrogen. But we didn't see in the past a lot of focus on heat, and in particular high temperature heat. And for us, that was very important to address this major challenge for emissions and global emissions. As I was saying, like heat is a major issue for the industry. So that's how we started, like working with technical reports. We starting with fact sheets, working on thermal energy storage because it's related to this topic. So with different type of support, we wanted to put heat also on the European discussion. And that's how we started slowly, as I always say, to put a topic on the agenda and organizing some events, what we call Coffee and Cleantech. It's technical briefing for policymakers, for instance. We also worked with other organizations so that to brief them, but also to hear their feedback from their membership, for instance. We have been in contact with innovators, with the industry. And then during the years, over several years, we have been building this narrative and the change that we wanted to see in terms of public spending and where it would make sense that the EU spends its money.
And what is Coffee and Cleantech? It triggered my attention. I'm curious to zoom in. What is Coffee and Cleantech?
Coffee and Cleantech. So, well, it's really a technical briefing. It's 45 minutes only for policymakers. So European
Is it a
Commission.
live event or is it digital?
live events, so in person only, 45 minutes before the European institutions meeting starts, so early in the morning. And we select a very specific targeted topic where we want policymakers to brief policymakers. And it's not policy recommendations, it can be related to the policy framework, but not specific recommendation or anything we want to push, but it's really explaining how to innovate in some areas. If you take steel, we had a recent coffee and cleantech on steel decarbonization. So we wanted to look at steel making processes through hydrogen, which is the most major route, but we also look into innovation. So molten oxides electrolysis or electrowinning, so different types of solutions, and where policymakers, maybe not on the very short term, but in the midterm, that could be interesting also to support this. So we are always trying to think out of the box and to bring the technical knowledge to policymakers.
And how many people do you usually attend? Like, what have you found is effective for this kind of format?
Yeah, absolutely, because it's only 45 minutes. So we want to be very targeted, and we have around like 15, 20. The maximum we had was 30, but usually I don't authorize this number. It's like
you
more
try to have a very
20,
selected group.
Yes, 20 people so that we can really have interaction. But it's interesting because you have people from the parliament, people from the commission, European Innovation Council or the Innovation Fund, so you put also people together, and that's also interesting because they can interact and they can think together.
Yeah, this kind of initiative made me very interested because with AI replacing and actually commoditizing a lot of access to information, a lot of the, say, things that you could access online actually are not very unique anymore. But it's especially being able to create moments like this, like what you guys have done with Coffee and Cleantech, and a small almost community or movement around that, which is very unique, and it's actually not something that AI can replicate. So this kind of initiative really sounds interesting to me. I'm curious to know, is there anything else that you're working towards for the coming quarter?
Well, actually, we just finished our festival, which was about looking Future Cleantech Festival. So bringing people, policymakers, NGOs, think tanks inside the factories, inside the electricity network utility, and to discuss the main challenges about steel, scrap, about electrification of heat, about how to adapt the grid, for instance. So we have just finalized that, and we will bring all this now into a policy work in Brussels. So that's one point. And the rest, we are now looking into clean farm power, so how to make the energy system resilient with complementary to conventional wind and solar, so looking into next generation geothermal, for instance. So many things on our plate and to develop.
A lot is happening. So what's the best way for the ones who want to stay in touch and hear more about what FCA is working at?
Yeah, I would say, don't hesitate to connect with any of us on LinkedIn. It's also
Marlene was very open, as I can testify. She replied to my LinkedIn connection request. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm always very happy to connect, to take coffee, and they have it in Brussels, in Remscheid, in Cambridge, in Amsterdam, Munich or Berlin. You can follow us on social media. You can also subscribe to our newsletter. But we are very open, motivated, and just grab your phone and call us.
Cool. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Marlene.
Thank you, Federico. Thanks.
Cool.